First of all, I want to say thank you this morning for the invitation to Jackie and I to speak to you. Between the time of us being invited and saying yes, Jackie's become ill and unfortunately doesn't feel well enough to take part this morning, so it's down to me. But please continue to pray for her. She is improving and we thank God for that. Suffering. My mind immediately turned to an Old Testament Bible character. His name was Job, but I often wonder if his friends called him Murphy, because it seemed that anything that could go wrong for him did go wrong for him. He was like a friend I used to work with, who used to say if it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all. Job was the righteous man's poster boy. The Bible tells us that he was blameless, a man of complete integrity, who feared God and stayed away from evil. And just to top it off, we're told that he was the richest man in the area. But these aren't the things that made Job famous. We've all heard of Job. And as I started mulling over what we'd been asked to speak on, I was thinking of the phrase, the patience of Job. That's a phrase that most of us are familiar with. But you don't have to read very far into the story to discover that the phrase, the patience of Job, is actually an oxymoron. Job may have trusted God and he may have been faithful, but patient he wasn't. Listen to the words in Job 10, 1-3. I am disgusted with my life. Let me complain freely. My bitter soul must complain. I will say to God, don't simply condemn me. Tell me the charges you're bringing against me. What do you gain by oppressing me? Why do you reject me? The work of your own hands while smiling on the schemes of the wicked. Not, I think, the words of a patient man. And the phrase, the patience of Job, is never used in the Bible. However, did you know that the phrase, by the skin of my teeth, does come from the Bible? And actually it comes from this same book of Job. You've probably heard the phrase before. And you know what it means. If not, according to Wikipedia, it says that by the skin of my teeth is used to describe a situation which one has barely managed to escape from. Now, the first part of the story of Job is a little confusing. I don't understand it, and I can't really explain it. It seems that one day the various angels appeared before God, reporting on what they had done, and Satan shows up. And during the ensuing conversation, God questions Satan on his activities, and Satan responds by saying, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. And at that point, God draws Satan's attention to his servant Job, and how righteous he is. And Satan says, sure, and why wouldn't he serve you? You've always protected him. You protected him and his property, and everything he touches turns to gold. Take away his possessions, and I guarantee you that he will curse you. Now, what I really don't understand is why at this point God agrees to allow Satan access to Job. Someday I might understand it, but right now I don't. A long time ago I discovered that God is way up there and I'm way down here, and I cannot understand everything that God does. But that's okay, because if I did understand everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God. But that's exactly what happens. Not very long after this conversation, Job is at home when a servant arrives to tell him some news. He tells him that his enemies have raided the farm, stolen his oxen and donkeys and killed all of his farm hands. And then just then another messenger arrives and says, "You'll never believe what's happened, boss. Fire fell from the sky and burned up your sheep and shepherds." And then a third guy arrives on the scene and informs Job that all of his camels have been stolen by raiders from the north. Now, you have to admit at this point, Job seems to be handling it pretty well, until the fourth messenger arrives to tell his boss that a powerful wind has hit the house where his children were celebrating with their oldest brothers and sisters, and there have been no survivors. All 10 of his children have died. It was at this point that Job broke down in grief. But even with that, listen what he says in Job 1:21. "I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Blessed be his name." Wow. And the Bible sums it up in the next verse by saying in Job 1:22, in all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. So does that mean if he had blamed God, he would have sinned? Well, someone must have come along and said, "Cheer up, Job. Things could be worse." Because he cheered up, and sure enough, things did get worse. Because up until now, the tragedies that had happened to the things and the people surrounding Job, but not to Job himself. And Satan told God, "Well, sure, he can still praise you. He still has his health. Let me take that away from him." And again, I don't understand it, but God agreed, saying, "I just spare his life." Personally, I think Satan underestimated Job as a parent. I think the death of his children would be far greater tragedy than mere physical discomfort. But Job becomes covered with boils from head to foot. However, in all of the things that Job lost, Satan left him with his wife. And you might say that's just nasty. Not so. Listen to the comfort Job's wife offers to him in Job 2:9. She says to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die, and by the way, your breath stinks." "Why, thanks, babe. I love you too." And so for the next 40 or so chapters, we read how various friends came and the discussions they had concerning the tragedies that had befallen our hero. And it's in one of these discussions with his friends that Job describes everything he's gone through with these words: "I have been reduced to skin and bones, and have escaped death by the skin of my teeth." And you know how narrow a margin that is, because your teeth don't have any skin. Through all of this, through the loss of his fortune, through the loss of his family, through the loss of his health, through it all, Job remained true to God. So what can we learn from this story that might help us today? Number one, stuff happens. Because you're a member of the human race, you will have troubles, and you can't get around that. We live in a world that has been corrupted by evil, and because of that, bad things happen, even to believers. It would be great if becoming a Christian exempted you from all the hurt and heartache in life. If once you became a Christian, a Christ follower, if from that point on you never got sick, you never lost your job, never suffered the loss of a spouse or a child. But that's not the way it happens. Be nice if our salvation was a passport out of suffering and tragedy. If that was reality, we'd have to bar the doors of our churches to keep people out. But that's not the way it happens, sorry. And Jesus' brother James wrote a letter to the early church And in it he writes this in James 1:2. That's James chapter 1, verse 2. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Did you catch that? He didn't say if trouble comes your way. He said when trouble comes your way. And there's a world of difference between if and when. Jesus himself told his followers in Matthew 6:34, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. Today's trouble is enough for today. Tomorrow will bring its own worries. I think C.S. Lewis summed it up very well when he said this. We were promised sufferings. They're part of the programme. We were even told, blessed are they that mourn. And no, it isn't fair. There are times that life isn't fair. We live in a world that has been corrupted by sin, and stuff happens. Little stuff and big stuff. In the 2014 edition of Psychology Today, Dr. Loretta Brown wrote an article entitled Why People Confuse Fairness with Self-Interest. And her premise was that what we define as fair may only be fair to us. So in your mind, it would have been fair if you got that perfect job. But what about the person who didn't get it? Life would have been fair if you hadn't had your heart broken. Or if you hadn't been in the accident. Or if COVID or some other illness hadn't affected you, your job and your family. But whether you think life has treated you fairly or not, you're probably doing all right compared to Job. Which leads us to the next point. Don't take it personally. Sometimes when trouble happens, we tend to look at it a couple of different ways. As Christians, we often start by looking inwards for reasons. We wonder, what have I done? Why me? I don't deserve this. In fact, we had a friend in Cornwall who would often, before praying for healing, ask the person, is there any sin in your life? Job hadn't done anything wrong. There was no hidden sin in his life. He wasn't rebelling against God. He was a righteous man, full of integrity. And we need to realise that trouble happens to the just and to the unjust. And I know that's seen as a cynical view of life, but Jesus said in Matthew 5:45, he gives his sunlight to both evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. How often do we focus on our problems to the exclusion of everything and everyone else? We aren't alone in this world, and the chances are there are people with bigger problems than us. It was Humphrey Bogart who said everyone in Casablanca has problems, probably everyone in Capel has problems. The second thing that believers do is to automatically attribute every problem in their life to Satan. Now, I don't want to underestimate the power of the Dark One. However, I think we give him way too much credit. I don't know about you, but I'm a child of God. And there are certain privileges that come with that position. And my Bible still has 2 Thessalonians 3:3. The Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and guard you from the evil one. Sure, you say, but what about when you're in bondage? And again, I don't want to minimise spiritual warfare, but there are a lot of people out there who are in bondage because they choose to be in bondage. It's a very convenient excuse when we enjoy a sin to simply throw up our hands and say, I can't help it. I'm in bondage to this. And you can fill in your own blank. I'm not sure that that's what Jesus had in mind when he told his disciples in John 8:34. I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave is not a permanent member of the family, but a son is a part of the family forever. So, if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. I like that. If the Son sets you free, you're truly free. Maybe we each need to claim that promise ourselves. Maybe as we get up in the morning and look in the mirror, we ought to say to ourselves, the Son set me free, so I am therefore truly free. But Keith, what if what happened to Job happened to me? What if God allows Satan to strike at my family, to strike at me? Can I say it probably won't happen? Job is a very much an isolated incident in the scriptures. We can't explain why God allowed it to happen the first time, but we certainly don't read about it happening again. And remember the description of Job. The Bible tells us he was blameless, a man of complete integrity, who feared God and stayed away from evil. If that's the criteria for being tested by Satan, then most of us have nothing to worry about. Please don't be in so much of a hurry to give the devil all the credit for the bad stuff that happens in your life. To quote C.S. Lewis again, there are two equal and opposite errors into which we can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unbelievable, unhealthy interest in them. And they themselves are equally pleased by both errors. Thirdly, this morning, it's not wrong to question. Stay again. Thirdly, it's not wrong to question. We're often given the impression that Job stoically endured all that happened, that he never asked why, that he never questioned. Whether it was fair or not, he just endured. And that just isn't true. For most of the 40 chapters of the book of Job, Job was asking why. Listen to his words in Job 7, for instance. Why won't you leave me alone? At least long enough for me to swallow. If I've sinned, what have I done? O watcher of all humanity, why make me your target? Am I a burden to you? Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? There's nothing wrong in asking why. Throughout the Bible, people question God. Abraham asked why. Moses asked why. Joshua asked why. David asked why. Isaiah asked why. Peter, Paul, and even Jesus, when he was hanging on the cross, looked up to heaven and asked, why? But listen, if you're going to ask God why, you're going to have to be satisfied with the answers, and that can be tough. Because as God asks Job in Job 38 verse 2, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Because as I've already said, and I'll say it again, God is God and we are just people. But a little homework for you this week. Why don't you read Job chapters 38 to 40. It won't take you long, but it might help you understand God a little more. And fourthly, we have the victory. Sometimes we can figure out a solution to our problems on our own, but more often than not, that's not enough. And so if you get nothing else out of this morning's message, get this: we win. When we're faithful to God in the good times and in the bad, we're the victors. Listen to what Paul wrote to the early church in Rome. And remember, this was where the persecution broke out against the early church, where Christians were killed for the sheer sport of it. Romans 8:35 says this: can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted, or hungry, or destitute, or in danger, or threatened with death? As the scriptures say, for your sake we are killed every day. We're being slaughtered like sheep. No, despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ, who loved us. Did you catch that? Overwhelming victory is ours. And then we're promised in 1 John 5:4 that every child of God defeats this evil world, and we achieve this victory through our faith. Folks, we win. The story's not over yet, so don't throw your hands up and say, I quit. Friends, the message I leave with you today is don't quit, don't give up. The victory has already been won. So, where are you this morning? Again, in Psychology Today, Dr. Mark Branch writes this: the book of Job asks why good people suffer, but never actually answers the question. What it does do is correct misconceptions about why we suffer. The truth of this wonderful tale is that man cannot know everything. Do you sometimes find it tough to be faithful, to believe for victory? I want to pray for you this morning. Life is tough, but God is there for us. I don't know what you're going through today, but I know God does. And regardless of where you are this morning, send me a private message through WhatsApp. I don't need to know any details other than, Keith, will you pray for me? Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the reassurance that you love each one of us and we win. Whatever the suffering, whatever the form, the direction it comes from, we win because you love us.